I'm Nathan Skipper, and this is session 16 in the MTI Control Systems Technicians Training course. And in this final video for the training course, or the online training course, we're going to cover adding objects in ProDesign and how to manage them, change the properties in them, and basic concepts about this. As I said, this will be the final session for the online training. We do intend to add labs that provide examples for each of these sessions in the near future, but if you are interested in diving in deeper into this control system and understanding the concepts in a more in-depth manner, then I would encourage you to come to our on-site training course that we host here periodically through our headquarters in Greenville, Alabama. The training is free to anyone who would like to attend, but you do have to provide your own meals and hotel stay and travel, but the course itself is free to anyone who would like to attend who has an MTI system or who plans to install MTI systems. And so if you would like to do that, you can go to our website and find out more information about that under the support menu. But for this class, for this session, we're going to cover the concepts of adding and managing objects on a screen in ProDesign. Under the insert menu on any screen in ProDesign, you have a number of options there that allow you to add different types of objects, ranging from a button all the way to a screen itself. And so I want to explain each of those options under the insert menu, and then we'll get into the details of setting up a button itself, which is endemic of all of the other, or exemplary of all the other types of objects that you could add. A button is defined as a raised icon which provides both indication and output behavior. By raised, we mean it has a bevel to the icon, which is obvious that it can be pressed to provide some sort of output. An icon is a flush level icon, which is mostly used for indication, but also can be used for output if you've programmed it to do so. A label is a text label that sits on the screen and provides some direction to the operator as to what he or she is looking at. A screen link is a box or a section on the screen which connects the user with a link or provides the user with a link to another screen. The keypad is an intercom master keypad which handles intercom call-ins and provides a stack for identifying those call-ins and prioritizing the call-ins. 7-segment display is a numerical display providing a number between 0 and 9, which is used for counters and elevator control, and also some of our older intercom control as well. The screen menu provides the ability to add a new screen for displaying the floor plan and objects within that screen. The protect button is a macro effectively for adding a protect feature button to the screen, and then the hold open button does the same thing for the hold open option. These are two buttons that allow you to add that functionality without having to have the right click capabilities, so that the operator doesn't have to right click on an object to do the protect or the hold open, which he or she would normally have to do if he was wanting to carry out those functions. To add a new screen, you would go to the insert menu and then click new screen. Once you do that, you would be provided with the screen properties form, which you see there in figure 1601, and I'll describe the fields here as provided. So first of all, you would have a description of the screen, which would just be a basic description of it. the unique number identifying the screen, and this would be associated with your PLC software in your project sheet, which you can set the screens associated with each sheet, and this number would associate that screen to that sheet so that when you do the imports it would pull in that information correctly. In the type drop down, you have some options for standard, floating, and disable, and what those means is if it's standard, then it just means that that screen is set to be a screen in the main screen of ProVision. If it's floating, then that means that this screen will be detached automatically from the main screen of ProVision. You can move it around within the screen, the overall screen format of your computer. And if it is disabled, then that means this screen is going to be used in the event of a disable, that the touchscreen is disabled. So you should only have one disabled screen for any project touchscreen setup. Timeout means the seconds of inactivity to change back to the previous screen. So if you wanted to set this to anything beyond blank or greater than 0, it would be the number of seconds that you would remain on this screen before you move back to the previous screen. So that allows you to time out. Let's say if you went to an elevator control screen and you wanted to only allow you to be on that screen for so many seconds before it moved back to the previous screen if there was no activity on that screen. And so this would be where you would set that. The graphic field is where you would set the path to the bitmap that would represent the background of this screen, and you can use the pick button to use a dialog box to pick that file. The name would be the unique name for that, and that would be how the system identifies in shorthand the screen that you're on. The disable IO allows you to set an IO tag which will cause this particular screen to be disabled. So this is beyond the functionality of disabling the entire touchscreen, but rather, let's say you had a key switch that if that key switch was engaged, then this particular screen would not be enabled. Or let's say if you wanted to allow local control of an elevator panel, and when that local control enable button was on, then this screen could not be used to control the elevator. You could do things like that to disable the screen based on certain inputs from the system. And then lastly, you can set the background color. By clicking into the gray square there, you can use a color wheel to select the background of the screen for this particular new screen. Now, when you want to add a button or really any other object on this to the screen, you can choose to go to Insert and then choose the type of object that you want to add. For this example, we're going to focus on the button because the button covers pretty much all the other functionality that you would have for any of the other objects. So we'll focus on that as well. But you can add an object by going to Edit and then going to the Tags menu. And when you go to that menu, you'll see the same screen we're going to cover in a later slide here, which would provide a button at the bottom of that screen which would allow you to add the object for the tag, and that would use a default setting for the object that you're adding based on the tag that's defined for it. So we're going to cover each of these tabs and the fields in each of them. So the first thing you want to look at is the General tab, and on that you'll have the caption, and you can set the text for that caption in the tag or in the object. You can also set whether that text is bold or normal, and you can set the font. And by this, the two fields that you see there on the screen are not for you to type in whatever font or whatever size you want. They're to tell you what you currently have for the font. You should use the Select Font button to use a font selection dialog to pick that. The security level allows you to select the minimum security level for operators that can access this object. And this is a very interesting function of ProDesign and ProVision, in that if you remember when we were discussing in the videos on ProVision, you could set an operator to have a certain security level. And that ties to this field here, so that if you set this button to have a 100 security level, then an operator that has a 99 level of security cannot use that button. And so he would have to enter in a supervisor username and password to be able to use that button. Here you can set the tooltip, which pops up when you hover over this button, and it will provide some sort of additional instruction for the operator. And you can also set the text for the F1 key. So if the operator presses the F1 key when hovering over this particular button, then this will provide instructions to the operator for that button. And then the next tab that you'll see for the button properties is the I/O assignment. And in this case, you're going to be able to select how this button will behave in the inputs and outputs for that button. You have the first thing is your function switch, which if your object is a function button like hold open or protect, you can set that. Otherwise, you're going to set it to none. You can select the primary I/O tag for this object, which we'll cover in the next slide. But selecting the primary I/O tag tells you what input and output should be primary for this object. You can also select the secondary I/O tag, which tells you what the secondary I/O tag should be for it and how it should behave secondarily. And then you can select the lock switch tag for this object. And this is so that if you wanted to have a separate input for your DPS and your lock position switch, you could do that by selecting those as primary and LS or lock switch tag for the object. You can provide the 3 different types of I/O behavior, which there are 7 different, up to 7 different types of functionality you can provide for each I/O tag. And so you could say that the first I/O behavior is going to be single output, and in that case then it will, on the primary output, it will do a single output to that. You could also say that you want this to be a dual output. So if this button is clicked, then not only is that the primary address hit, but the secondary I/O address is hit as well. Or it's a screen link, or it's disabled on secondary, so that if the secondary input is coming in, then the primary address is disabled and the object is disabled, or vice versa. It can be enabled on secondary. So there's a number of functions that you can carry out, particularly with these I/O type assignments. And if it's a screen link, then you can tell it which screen it links to itself. Timeout in milliseconds means the amount of time you're going to hold that output out in milliseconds. So this would be, if you wanted to set that to 500, then it would set that output out for 500 milliseconds. The default is 500, so if you set it to 0, then it's going to hold it out for 500. The group number would be where you would set, if you had a set of doors that you wanted to all associate together for one group, and then you have a group release button associated with that group, then you could designate a unique group number, 1 through however many, so that all those buttons were associated together in one group. The allow hold open would be that you're going to allow this object to be held open if right click or hold open button is pressed. Protect is the same, display a message when in protect mode, or you want to display a ring around the object when it's in protect. And then if the I/O type selection has some sort of message associated with it, then with that particular functionality, then you could put the message in there for that. So one of the functions might be an alert with message function, or an output with a message function. And in that case, you could put the message that you wanted to say in that so that the operator was alerted before they carried out that function. So a good example of that would be an emergency release, where if the operator clicked that button, then they were presented with an "Are you sure?" question before they went on to carry that out. The next thing we want to cover is the IO tag. In the IO tag, you're given the ability, when you click the select primary or select secondary or select LS on the IO assignments, you're given the ability to select the sheet and then the address associated with this object. And that goes back to the import table that we covered on the last session. But here you would be able to select the IO sheet for this object, and then the address that you want to associate with the object. And you'll notice there are a ton of settings. We won't be able to cover all of them in this video, but you'll notice there are a ton of settings that you can associate with this tag based on how you want this object to function. So you can pick the session, the sheet, and the address, and then you click, if this tag is not already added, you can click the add tag to add it here. Once you've done that, there are a number of settings you can do, one being the screen link. So if you want this object to link when it's clicked, or when it's the input comes in, you can pick the type to be on input. Normally it defaults to from log, so that if the operator selects the event from the log, then it links to a particular screen for that object. And then you can select the screen that links to. If this is a camera icon, then you can select you can enter in the camera number and the default monitor for the camera interface, so that it outputs that to the serial interface or to the Henley interface to call up a particular camera number and default monitor for that camera. You can set the lighting circuit and relay for the lighting interface, or if this is an intercom tag, then you can set the default receive volume and transmit volume depending on what type of tag it is. So this would be the lighting relay and tag or transmit volume associated with that. You can play a sound associated with that, so with the tag, so anytime there's an alarm on this tag, or anytime there's an output provided for the tag, you can determine when that sound is played and what the sound is. And remember, we said that's referenced back to the C drive, MTI, and sounds directory. So the drop down box that's given here will give you a list of those files associated with that, and then you can test it by using the play button there. The event logging allows you to select what type of event this is going to be, so message, trouble, alarm, or screen, and then you can set the on and off messages associated with that. If your tag changes, then you again can come in here and update your tag. If you want to add the object, so instead of adding it by adding the object first, you can add it by adding the tag first by going to edit and then edit tags, and then you can add the object to the screen by selecting the add object, and it will add a default object type for that. You can add a timed event for this tag, which will then be managed in ProVision, which we talked about on an earlier presentation. If you want to use this with the associated object that you're working on, then just simply click the pick button, and that will use this tag for that object. So next we have the graphics tag, or graphics tab, and with the graphics tab, that allows you to set the icon, and by clicking on the on icon here, or the brown area there, you can choose what icon you want to select there, and it will give you a list of, or a grid of icons that are available. And remember, that's associated with the C MTI icons directory. The same thing's true of the off state if you want to indicate a certain thing when the icon is off. And then you can set the text color by clicking in this area here. You can select the background color for the button, the ring color, and the protect color based on what state it's in. And lastly, you can set this device or this object that you're setting up as a default, so that anytime you go into the edit tags and click on the add object, if that tag property matches the same properties as this tag, then, or this object, then it will insert an object just like this with all the same properties, except the IO tag will be different for that object. And so you can set the type, so this is associated with the device type in the PLC programming, or the function if you want to say that this is true for all PLS functions in the programming, then it will use the same object settings for everything that's a PLS programming function. Or an address. Let's say you want to do all odd addresses have the same look and all even addresses have the same look. Then you can do that, and it will add this type of object for all of that.